right, folks. Okay, we're back again today, kind of exploring the whole Scottish independence issue again. Um, Today we're going to be looking at an interview on Good Morning Britain. Good Morning, was it Britain or London? Anyway, it's over in the UK. And we have Piers Morgan and not sure what her name is. Are interviewing Ian Blackford, who is a leading member of the SNP, which is the Scottish National Party. It's an interesting interview where they're asking a lot of the things about, it's basically going through the fact that Scotland wants to leave the UK, and they question him quite a bit about that, and it's a long interview, but the whole thing I question about this is that the tactics of Piers and basically the reporters in this, in the way that they're, the way they were choosing to argue their points, I felt that there was a lot more theatrics, a lot less substance in what they were saying than what we were getting from Ian. It's very interesting stuff. So I'm looking to put together something else here pretty soon, real quick, because you're going to hear it talked about here with they keep the reporters will keep talking about a coalition with Jeremy Corbyn and Labour. I'm going to try to put together a video here real soon or whatever, so people can understand what they're talking about the way that Parliament works and how the SNP could potentially help Jeremy Corbyn form a government there at the House of Commons, and so I'll try to get that to where everybody can understand that a little bit better, because I know over here in America we don't really understand how that works in a minority government and this and that and all those various things. Even I only kind of understand it because I've seen things about it before. But anyways, I'm going to try and get something together to completely to help that be a lot more understandable of what that means and why it is the SNP could potentially help Labour get into forming a government. So, look forward to that coming out pretty soon. But today, here we are looking at Ian Blackford for the SNP getting pretty rigorously grilled by a couple reporters. So here we go.
If then you want to keep Boris Johnson out, are you in the mood for doing a deal, perhaps, with Jeremy Corbyn, if he's in a position to form a government but needs your help? And would a second independence referendum form the basis of that deal?
Well, good morning, Susanna, and good morning, Piers. We look forward to there being a hung parliament and to make sure that we can make Scotland's voice heard. And I'd simply say to Jeremy Corbyn or anybody else that don't pick up the phone to the Scottish National Party unless you're prepared to concede that there has to be a referendum on Scottish independence, and that has to happen in 2020. And Susanna, the reason that we're asking that is because we won an election in Scotland in 2016 to the Scottish Parliament with a manifesto commitment that in a change of circumstances like Brexit, that we need to make sure that the people of Scotland have got that right to choose.
Okay.
So we want that
well, that's
referendum.
interesting that you
and of
say
course
that.
We want
Yes,
to
of
work
course.
with others.
Okay, so you said we believe the Scottish Parliament should have the right to hold another referendum if there is clear and sustained evidence that independence has become the preferred option of a majority of the Scottish people. Well, currently the polls don't show that. And secondly, or if there is a significant and material change in the circumstances, such as Scotland being taken out of the EU. But Jeremy Corbyn has pledged to hold a second referendum on whether we leave or remain. And if we then remain, why would you need a second referendum in Scotland?
Okay, so before we get to Ian's answer here, I want to point out one thing. What this reporter is saying here is, number one, a hypothetical situation. She kind of acts like as if it's a foregone conclusion, but it's a hypothetical situation. She says, what if Jeremy Corbyn, the leader of the Labour Party, gets into the, with help he's going to need help, obviously. But if he does get the opportunity to put a government together and everything, would the SNP join with Labour to, help him, get a government and form a government, essentially. You have to have so many seats in the House of Commons, and on it goes. So that's what she's referring to. So she's saying that if Jeremy Corbyn does establish a government, and be it with the help of the SNP, one of his goals is to get out of the whole Brexit thing, and to just stay in the EU. And what she's saying is that if that happens, then you wouldn't need Scottish independence, or whatever and everything. So she's attacking him personally as like, you're just all gung ho. Well, the fact is, Ian and the SNP are gung ho for Scottish independence. They feel that that's the best road for Scotland. What I'm more concerned with is what Scotland wants, and what the people of Scotland want, and what they feel is the better alternative. So what's of interest to me is that this is what I don't know if she even knows when she asks the question, if she knows these things. If Jeremy Corbyn was to be able to form a government, and was the leader of a, what do they call, a minority government, and if he was able to manage to get Parliament to decide to just stop with the whole Brexit thing and stay in the EU, if those things were to happen, well, the support that the SNP is getting from the Scottish people for independence would quickly dissipate. Because if Scotland could stay in the UK and in the EU, that is what most Scots want. That's what, from just an outsider observing, that's definitely something that I've noticed. So this is just something that occurred to me listening to this reporter ask this question. And I wondered, does she understand this herself when she asks it? I'm sure Ian understands it. Of course, he's not going to acknowledge that. He doesn't want to talk about that, and how if Jeremy Corbyn did that, because that's just not what his party's politics are about. So he's gonna obviously sidestep that. But the point is that if the UK decided to remain in the EU and the whole Brexit thing went away, the support for Scottish independence would dissipate just as quickly. At least that's my feeling on it, looking at it from the outside. So, but anyways, just wanted to offer that little tidbit because of just the kind of vitriol with which she offers her questions is just, the lack of objectivity here is shocking to me. So.
Well, I think you've used a key phrase there, such as. It's not just about Brexit, and I think it is about the desire that people do have to make sure we can determine our own future. And when you look at polling,
but we've already seen from the polls that desire isn't there currently. You don't have a majority for independence.
I was just going to answer that for you. There was a poll in the Sunday Times that did demonstrate that not just people in Scotland, but people actually throughout the UK recognise the right of the people of Scotland to choose. And of course, when you ask the specific question as to whether Scotland would be better off with independence, again, a Sunday Times poll showed that 45% of those in Scotland in that poll thought Scotland would be better off independent in the EU, against only 35% thinking we'd be better off staying in the UK. So things are changing, Susanna, and it's about us providing the leadership in that debate. And we won that election in 2016. We've got that manifesto commitment. It's about making sure that the Scottish Parliament has the powers to enact that. And that power should lie with the Scottish Parliament and not with Westminster.
Let me ask, did you watch the Andrew Neil interview with Jeremy Corbyn last night?
I haven't. I've seen, obviously, the press headlines, Piers, but I didn't see the interview. I was at a football game last night. I had a night off from the campaign trail watching Hibs versus St Mirren, so I apologise for that.
Well, you may have missed one of the highlights or lowlights of the campaign
The question I was going to ask is on the basis of that interview. 4 times Jeremy Corbyn refused to apologise for the rampant anti-Semitism that has infested the Labour Party in the last few years under his tenure. What do you make of this furore that's erupted over Jeremy Corbyn, the Labour Party, and anti-Semitism?
At this point, I want to bring up Piers Morgan there. Previous to watching this show here with him, I'd only seen him on shows on Netflix, things where true crime things where he'd gone into prisons and talked to inmates and done some investigative kind of stuff. And I found him to be fairly objective and was fairly impressed with those. But then I saw this, where he completely lacks objectivity and all that sort of stuff. So it was quite a different experience to watch him in this, because he's very much he has the demeanor not of a respected or knowledgeable or credible news reporter, so much as he has the demeanor of a morning shock jock, which I found to be interesting. So, and he deliberately misunderstands things, or is, unwilling to comprehend certain things because it interferes with the narrative that he has, the agenda that he has. That's what's so disappointing about Piers in this particular thing, because he so clearly has an agenda that he is actively working on, and he's just continually trying to push Ian into saying certain things, and it's quite interesting the rest of the interview to watch. And Ian obviously is very smart, and he understands exactly what Piers is doing, and so he gives Piers the actual facts and the actual correct answers of the way that a responsible politician and responsible people conduct themselves. And Piers is just like, no, what would you do? And he's just insistent on this hypothetical series of events that he is stuck on, and trying to pin Ian, and he, as he clearly states, he tried to pin down Jeremy Corbyn, the leader of the Labour Party, on the same thing. And so he's trying to pin them down with this very finite set of circumstances, basically about the leader of ISIS, all that you'll see later. And it's just very interesting to watch. So here we go.
They have a problem with this, Piers. It's a very serious problem, and I would say to Jeremy that he really has to confront this properly. I mean, you've seen MPs that have been forced out of the Labour Party over the course of the while over this, and it's really a stain on society that we've got this, whether it's to do with what's happening in the Labour Party with anti-Semitism, any kind of abuse on any group in society based on ethnicity, based on religion or whatever, cannot be tolerated, and all of us in public life have got a responsibility to give leadership to that. And I think Jeremy has to do more, the Labour Party has to do more. I really feel for friends, colleagues in the Jewish movement that feel unease, and they've got to be reassured that living in Scotland, living in the United Kingdom, that this is their home, they're welcome here, and they should not be under any kind of pressure at any time. And there really has to be an unequivocal statement from all of us on that.
So, I mean, for me, that was a perfectly fine question right there. Piers asks, he's like, obviously there's this problem with anti-Semitism that is becoming evident in the Labour Party, and he's asking Ian, who is not a member of the Labour Party, but he's asking Ian for his thoughts on it. And so what does Ian do? He gives him his thoughts, and he says, look, I believe that there's obviously something going on in the Labour Party, and I think Jeremy Corbyn would do the right thing, or would be correct in doing something about it, and doing something to snuff it out and stop the what's happening. And he's basically saying that it's up to Jeremy Corbyn to do that, and that he should do it, because he includes himself, Ian, and them all as elected officials and MPs and stuff, have even a more intense obligation to hold true the principles of non-prejudice, being non-prejudiced, and everybody's equal, and so this anti-Semitism thing is something hanging over the Labour Party that is certainly not a good thing. He says it very clearly, states it very clearly, that he doesn't approve of anti-Semitism, that he thinks Jeremy Corbyn really needs to deal with the problem. But Piers doesn't leave it alone there. He basically then begins to turn it into an attack on Ian and the SNP. And that's something that I find interesting here. I'm not here to say who's right or wrong. All I'm here looking at is what's going to be best for the Scottish people themselves. That's really what I want to be able to determine. And when I watch this broadcast, I see more of this general disregard for Scots, for the Scots in the UK. And the more I see it, the more I understand why the SNP and is going to continue to gain, support, and why more and more Scottish people are going to start to think that they would prefer independence so that they can choose their own destiny in Europe, as opposed to being dragged along by the UK and being subjected to whatever the UK's will is. I think that prospect is becoming less and less appetizing for the Scottish, people. It's just my own thoughts, but what I find interesting here is that Piers Morgan chooses to he chooses to twist this issue that was introduced by his original question, which the original question was fine asking what he was asking, but then he after Ian answers, he now takes the question, kind of tries to twist it and spin it a little different way, and come at Ian as if it's an attack on Ian, that he somehow is supporting Labour. And so anyway, it's very interesting to watch. So here we go.
87% of British Jews believe that Jeremy Corbyn and his party are anti-Semitic. The chief rabbi yesterday came out and said he's unfit to be prime minister because of the anti-Semitism streak in him and his party. It does beg the question, if you share this view that this is such a serious matter, why on earth would you even contemplate
doing a deal,
getting into bed with the Labour Party and Jeremy Corbyn to do any kind of political deal over independence in Scotland? Surely the principal thing to do would be to say, we are not going to do business with a party or a leader that is so contaminated by anti-Semitism.
As I said to you, I do think there is a problem that Labour Party have with anti-Semitism in the way that this has played out. And there has been that failure of leadership that they've shown. And I think they have to recognise that they have to reassure the Jewish community. And I actually don't believe, personally, I know John Bercow covered this in an interview a few days ago, that Jeremy is anti-Semitic, but he has failed to put this matter to bed. He's failed to reassure the Jewish community. I'd say to you, Piers, we're not looking to get into bed with anyone. What we're seeking to do is to make sure that Scotland's voice is heard. We're seeking to make sure that our right to have a referendum is respected by Westminster. We certainly won't be going into coalition with anyone,
All
but
right,
we
but
will
your
work
position
with
on
progressive
referendums
forces in Parliament to make sure our...
OK, your position on referendums is quite interesting, isn't it? Because you don't want to accept the result of the referendum on Brexit. You don't want to accept the result of the referendum on Scottish independence. Is there any result of any referendum that you would accept?
Well, look, let's take these two things. As far as the 2016 referendum is concerned, my job is to stand up for voters in Scotland, and Scotland voted very heavily to remain. 62%.
It doesn't matter. Scotland's part of the United Kingdom, and the United Kingdom voted to leave the European Union. It doesn't matter that Scottish people may or may not have shared the general view. As long as you're part of the United Kingdom voted to leave the European Union.
Well, here's the point. Piers, here is the point. In our referendum in 2014, we were told quite explicitly that if we stayed in the United Kingdom, then our rights as EU citizens, our rights to remain in the European Union, would be respected. That was the central focus in many respects of the Better Together campaign. What we now find is that against our will, against our wishes, that we'll be taken out of the European Union, that we lose all the benefits, the free movement of people to live, to work, to get an education in Europe, is to be taken away from us. And we're not prepared to...
This does beg the question, doesn't it? If you're so keen on better together, staying part of the Union, all one big happy family, why do you want to smash up the United Kingdom and go for independence? The very thing that Leave voters in the Brexit campaign wanted to do, the thing that you apparently abhor. How can you be so
think that's very-
abhorred by what happened with Brexit and yet want the exact same thing for Scotland? I don't get it.
No. I think that's very pejorative language, if I may say so, but it's not about smashing up the UK. It's about making sure that we can remain friends with our nearest neighbours and partners in England and other parts of the United Kingdom. But the way that Europe works, it's a family of nations. There's respect shown across all the 28 EU member states. It is a rules-based organisation. It's very different from the way that the UK operates. And let me just give you a very small example of that.
Ian
We have to
Bradford,
get
you
what's
do
called
more of
convergence
your
uplift money. Money
trade
for
with the rest of the UK than you do with the EU. So actually breaking off from England and the rest of the UK is going to have a massive economic impact on Scotland, isn't it? And when you ask for your second...
Nobody's talking...
When you have your second referendum, what deal are you going to put to the Scottish people? Because we've already seen the problem about asking, leave or remain, but without a deal spelled out. Are you going to perhaps get a yes vote in Scottish independence referendum and then go and try and do a deal with the rest of the UK? You're going to put it back to the Scottish people when you've got that deal so that they can say, yes, that's exactly what they voted for? Because otherwise, aren't they going to be going into it blind, exactly as people are accusing us of going into the 2016 referendum?
Absolutely, unequivocally, no. And if I can make the contrast, what we had was a slogan on the side of a bus. There was no plan for leaving the European Union. When we had our referendum in 2014, we had a 650-page white paper. It was very clear what we were asking people to vote for, and it was about the vision and the values that we wanted as an independent Scotland.
Okay, so he's talking about the difference between the what led to Brexit with the UK and being a slogan on the side of a bus and a couple politicians quoting President Bill Pullman from Independence Day, the movie Independence Day. And that's kind of what happened with Brexit. But Scottish independence back in 2016, I think he says, when they had the referendum then or whatever, but when they were going to do this, he talks about that they had a 640-page white paper, so basically a very long, report that researched what it was essentially going to look like for Scotland to become independent and what that would translate, what would be needed, basically taking a look at it and what would be kind of required and necessary before actually leaping off and doing it. So that's something that's interesting. So that's what Ian's talking about, that the Scottish independence has not been approached in anything like the way that Brexit was. It's had a great deal of thought put into it. There has been the work put in for the planning and the like you said there, 640-page white paper that goes into a lot of the issues of what it would be required, what it would look like for Scotland to become independent. So, all right, here we go. Back to the report.
But in this matter of trade, the European single market is 8 times the size of the UK market. If I just give you the example of Ireland, if you go back to the 1940s, about 90% of Ireland's trade was with the rest of the UK. It's now 11% because they've very successfully diversified and grown a global economy. That's the opportunities that there are there for an independent Scotland, and of course we'll continue to trade as friendly neighbours with the rest of the United Kingdom. But on this issue of borders that Piers mentioned, no one's talking about a hard border in the island of Ireland. Why would anybody wanting to threaten that on the people of Scotland?
Well, hang on. I didn't actually mention borders. I was about to.
Well, you mentioned it earlier in the programme.
Yeah, but OK, so let's get to this issue of the border. The key problem with Brexit, according to the Remainers, has been this issue of a hard border in Ireland. What do you do if one part of Ireland is in the EU and one isn't? What do you do, right? And everyone agrees there has to be some kind of border somewhere. You seem to think that that's the case for Ireland, but a completely different kettle of fish if you were to be independent of Scotland. I mean, if you're going to have a separate entity as part of the EU as you want in Scotland, you've got to have a border with England. Where would that border go? How does it manifest itself? And how do you avoid a hard border? It's exactly the same conundrum that we have in Ireland, surely.
Well, first and foremost, of course, I think everyone respects the importance of delivering peace in Northern Ireland and the importance of the Good Friday Agreement. But let me say, Piers, that things have moved on over the course of the last while, and I don't think the UK government has probably understood the importance of technology changes that are there both on hardware and software that would allow for the movement of goods across border without having the infrastructure at the border. It exists.
So we
it
wouldn't
works,
need
it
a
can be
border,
done.
and that
You
could
need
also
to-
apply. That could also apply then to Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. It's technology that'll fix it.
Well, I do think there are technological advances which are there that we know about, that we know that people have spoken to the UK government about. They've certainly spoken to us. It can work. There are ways that this can be dealt with that negates the need for that infrastructure. This I accept is a very emotive subject, but I think we've actually got to look at the solutions to this rather than putting these barriers up which are not necessary in the modern world.
Let me ask you about nuclear weapons. Your stated position as a party is you want to get rid of the Trident nuclear defence system. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct. We don't see these weapons as being effective in the modern world. It used to be the case when you were talking about the nuclear deterrent that the advantage that they had, I'd never agreed with nuclear weapons, was that they were undetectable in the oceans. That's no longer the case. And I think we've got to reflect on what are the modern requirements of an effective defence and security organisation. And I just simply think that these weapons of mass destruction play no part in that. We've got to take our responsibility seriously.
The reality is they exist, and they exist in very large numbers around the world. And the argument in favour of the nuclear deterrent is it has kept the peace. There's not been a nuclear weapon used in anger since the Second World War. It has demonstrably worked in maintaining a nuclear peace. If we were to unilaterally disarm ourselves, why would we not then put the country at greater risk?
Well, the UK, of course, is talking about renewing the Trident system at a cost of something up to 200 billion. I'd simply say that given the changing nature of our defence and security needs and the fact that these submarines can now be detected, they are not fit for purpose the way they were in the past. And we need to make sure that our armed forces are properly funded. And I think there is a crisis in terms of funding of the defence services. We have to take our responsibilities seriously. And quite frankly, we're looking at the wrong direction, the wrong end of the telescope, if I may say so, if we're talking about replacing Trident. Let's make sure we support our defence forces. We have a very good relationship with the defence forces in the SNP Westminster Group to our defence team. But this is not the right way to look at a modern, efficient nation taking its responsibility seriously. We should be getting rid of these nuclear weapons.
Okay, this next thing is interesting. Piers has another question for Ian, and so he begins to pose it, and it's basically goes along the lines of they have British forces have the new leader of ISIS pinned down. They can take him out, and he ends up going through all this scenario of you know, the fact that he's the lady news caster there says that he's got a suicide vest on, that him and his team are heavily armed, and they're not going to be taken alive or whatever, right? And so they're coming up with all this stuff, and Ian's giving him the answer that Ian is prepared to give. He's not prepared to answer the question the way Piers wants, and because he won't answer it the way Piers wants him to answer it, Piers continues to just go at this, and he's very disrespectful. I'm not here saying right or wrong necessarily. I'm just saying that in this interview, I see Piers looking desperate with his arguments, and I see Ian talking about going along with the principles of democracy and doing things in the appropriate manner. And it would seem that the question is designed to possibly get either, he says he was asking Jeremy Corbyn the same question, now he's asking Ian, and it's like it's designed to get them to say they would do something unilaterally. That's what he's intending to get them to. That's the answer he wants from them, which he could then use and turn around on them. So you see the deceit in the question, kind of. That's my opinion. I'll see what you guys think here. But no matter what, Ian's a classy guy and he handles himself well. So here we go.
Jeremy Corbyn last night was incapable of answering the question as to whether, if he received information that British forces had cornered the new leader of ISIS and could take him out, would he give the order to take him out? Would you approve that order immediately to take out and kill the new leader of ISIS if British forces were in the position to do so?
We face a real threat. The Western world faces a real threat from Daesh, and we need to make sure that we face it down. Of course, things have to be done through the rule of law, but it is absolutely important that ISIS are removed as a threat to the Western world, but we do that through.
So what would you do in that
under
hypothetical question that Jeremy Corbyn was incapable of answering? What would you do? Would you give the order in that moment that the special forces have cornered the new leader of ISIS?
He's wearing a suicide vest.
He's heavily armed, and they have a position to take him out and kill him. Would you authorise them to do so?
As you know, Piers, there are rules of engagement, and of course, in extremis, if there's a situation that someone is a threat to life and cannot be taken into custody, then of course the military have got under rules of engagement the right to take action.
Okay.
So you would give the order for them to kill the head of ISIS in that situation?
Well, I've given you a nuanced position about the responsibilities.
I don't think there's much room for nuance, to be honest with you, in that situation. But this is the point, though, isn't it? There's not much time for nuance. When you're a leader, hang on. Let me explain what I mean.
Well,
I don't think there's much room or time for nuance in that scenario. You have to make an immediate judgment call. And if the armed forces, if the head of the armed forces says to you, we can take out this guy right now, you have literally seconds to make that decision. There's no time or room for nuance.
No, I understand that, and I used to serve on the ISC, the Security Committee of Parliament, so I'm aware of all the obligations that the security services have. The preference would be to take that individual into custody. If that can't be done, there are rules of operation, and I'll always support the security services.
Okay, so you would give the order to kill?
Well, I gave you the answer I did. I think you can make your own judgment on what I've said, but I'll back the security services.
Why are you afraid of saying you give the order to
acting
kill?
under the rules of engagement that they have. What I've said is that there are rules of engagement, and I will support the security services in carrying out their duties. I think that's a fairly clear answer, actually.
Well,
but there we are.
The answer is quite straightforward. Would you give the order to kill him or not? It's yes or no, isn't it?
Well, Piers, I think I've answered the question. To be brutally honest.
Well, to be brutally honest, that's exactly what you haven't done. You've talked about nuance and about rules of engagement and everything else. What you haven't done is, if it actually came to it and it was lawful to do so, would you give the order to kill?
Well, that's the key point. If things are lawful and if there is no other legitimate alternative to that, then of course these are things that take place. And we saw that with the previous leader of Daesh in the US over the course of the last few weeks, and that is something that I would support.
Okay, we got there in the end.
So to sum up, I'm still kind of absorbing this and trying to determine what is really best in the situation for all involved. But I see a lot of facts and and actual sensible things coming out of the SMP, and I see a lot of theatrics coming out of what would be the other side, essentially, or those who don't support Scottish independence. Now, I'm not saying Scottish independence is the way to go. As I've said before, I'm not saying that is the way to go at this point. All I'm saying is that this conversation is rising for a reason, and it will continue to rise. And just like I was saying about the lady newscaster earlier, I don't remember what her name is, but when she was talking about if Jeremy Corbyn was to initiate the UK staying in the EU, that and she was trying to get on Ian's case about that. Well, the fact of the matter is that no matter what Ian wants, if the UK decides to stay in the EU, I think the conversation about Scottish independence goes right back to ground zero. Okay, that's honestly what happens, and for two reasons. Number one, if there's no Brexit, there's no big significant change in the government to trigger the referendum, right? Because that huge significant change that Brexit would create of taking Scotland out of the EU would no longer be the problem or a big change, and therefore there would be no reason to trigger the referendum at that point. So that's one thing. So if Brexit was to be taken off the table, that would change the landscape of this situation greatly, the way I see it. So if there's any Scots or anybody out there from the UK who's watching this and has a few thoughts about, you know, what we were watching here, feel free to leave them below. I'm interested to hear what everybody's opinion is on this, because I really am not charged either way. I just really want what's best for the Scots in this, because, you know, they're a smaller country and they've been kind of just marginalized in a lot of ways, in the way that they've been treated throughout the Brexit negotiations, and it's just not something that Scotland wanted, and that's why I'm just, on the surface, this all seems like the reasons why this conversation has arisen again, because Scotland isn't keen to be taken out of the EU, and so long as that is on the table, I believe the issue of Scottish independence is going to continue to gain strength. So anyways, all right, like I said, give me your own thoughts below if you have any of your own thoughts about this. And if you haven't already, please hit subscribe, and we'll see you.